Wolf back. What is going on? It's your boy, the Wolf of Roto Street. RotoStreetJournal.com. We breed and feed you fantasy wolves here with your Week 14 waiver wire. It is Week 14, and we got kind of two camps of people here. Maybe you are pushing into the playoffs. You got to fight to get that spot in. Maybe you're fighting for a bye. Week 14 means everything. Or maybe you've already locked up the bye, or you're in a playoff spot. You can't really rise any further, and you're just looking ahead to weeks 15 to 17, the fantasy playoffs, the best time of the year. Either way, this is a crucial show. We got 6 teams on bye in week 14. Absolutely brutal scheduling here. So we're definitely going to need to plug some holes, but then we're also going to have to look ahead and talk about who can get the job done, who can bring you that fantasy championship and all the glory that comes with it. So we'll focus on both of those here on our waiver wire stream. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you're here live with me here on Tuesday night or catching the replay after the fact. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you. And if you enjoy what you hear at any point, the thumbs up does greatly help us out with that algorithm getting out to more people. I know I've missed a few of these in a row. Real life has just been too full, too good, moving to the new house, getting everything settled. I couldn't leave it up to my wife, but I had to get live for this week 14 one because it is so crucial. So we're going to start at quarterbacks. We'll go position by position as we always do. And we have, again, 4 crucial quarterbacks on bye, 6 total teams on bye, including Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, CJ Stroud. I guess I shouldn't be calling him crucial anymore. But even Anthony Richardson and Drake May have been useful quarterbacks. So we're going to have some holes to fill here in week 14. I'm going to talk about my 4 favorite options, as well as what they look like for the fantasy playoffs in case you want to stream them longer. Russ Wilson does lead off my list, fresh off a 414-yard, 3-touchdown day against the Cincinnati Bengals. An absolutely beautiful start for him this past week. And really, in general, he's gotten it done at a high level since becoming the Steelers quarterback over there. Sure, he had that one dud in the snow, but otherwise been very, very usable, very viable coming off that 31-point day. He also has 3 starts above 20 fantasy points so far on the year. So I do like him quite a bit with another good matchup. The Browns, again, giving up a ton of big plays. If you didn't watch it, Monday Night Football, go watch the recap and just watch how often Marvin Mims or whatever Bronco you want to name was running wide open down the field. And that's Russell's specialty. I think him and Pickens, they're going to light it up here. I know the snow game really wrecked what we could have had in a few weeks prior, but this matchup I expect to be a lot different, especially on the other side of things with Jameis Winston, we're going to talk about in a second, slinging it. But I really think this is a perfect mashup, 10.9 yards per attempt. He completed 9 passes of 20 or more yards. And again, that's exactly what the Browns do horribly, is defend the deep play. So I think we're going to be in for another bombs away Russ game on this week in week 14. And he is my top streamer of the week. Now, if you need something a little more long-term or you want just a little more ceiling, what better than Jameis Winston at this point? Only 16% rostered. It's a tough matchup against the Steelers, no doubt about it. In fact, the fewest points allowed to quarterbacks, but Denver, also a really tough matchup. Bottom 5 in terms of points allowed to QBs. And what did Jameis do? Absolutely bombed him for 38 fantasy points, 497 yards, 4 touchdowns on the day for Jameis. We had the best of him. We had the worst of him. Multiple pick sixes, tons of just boneheaded turnovers, but ultimately the gunslinger that we know and love, showcasing that he still has one of the best arms in the entire NFL. And in his 5 games as the starter, Jameis is the quarterback 5 in fantasy points per game, 22.7 points per game right now. That's ahead of Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Pat Mahomes, Tua, who's been hot right now, not as hot as Jameis. And he has 23 Jameis fantasy points in 3 out of 5 games. And one of those games, 23 or more, I should say, most often more, one of those games was a blizzard. So really 3 out of 4 games, he has performed admirably. He has racked up 1,680 yards. That's 336 per game, 43.6 attempts per game. And that includes the blizzard game. If you take that game out, he's averaging Jameis 47.7 attempts per game, most in the league, 365.5 pass yards per game, by far the most in the league. He'd be on pace to smash well over 5,000 passing yards had he been playing the full season. So Jameis Winston absolutely lighting it up, absolutely cooking right now. Seems to me that he's locked in at the starter. Yeah, there's the risk. Throws 2 pick sixes early in the game and gets the team behind big, and suddenly they bench him. I still think they'd lose the locker room. They clearly love this team. They love this guy. They love playing for Jameis. And so I don't think there's much of a risk. And then you look ahead to the fantasy playoffs. Gets Kansas City in week 15, the 10th most points allowed. We just saw Aiden O'Connell throw for 340 yards against them. That's a smash spot for Jameis where they're going to need to throw and ultimately keep their foot on the gas pedal. So I think that's another 350, 400 yards right there. And then Cincinnati, 3rd most points allowed to quarterbacks. Love that spot for Jameis as well. They just gave up, again, 400 to Russ, who we were just talking about. So I think Jameis legitimately has top 5 upside in both of those games. Probably will be ranked well inside my top 10 in both week 15 and week 16. So if you're looking for a streamer in your fantasy playoffs, look no further than Jameis Winston. He will absolutely crush it. Plus, there's nobody more fun to root for, no greater fantasy locker room presence. You might not understand exactly what's coming out of his mouth, but you're going to feel fired up to run through a brick wall. Either way, should you have Jameis Winston as your quarterback. Those two, again, Russ and then Jameis. And the more I talked about it, the more I'd probably just rather have Jameis. It's just like the man as a human being more than Russ. Ultimately, are my top 2. You drop a tier, though, if you're in deeper leagues. Neither of those guys are available. Well, maybe you check out Will Levis. He's had his 4 best scores all the past 4 weeks since he came back. He was pretty banged up to start the year, not giving him any excuses. It was abysmal to watch, multiple pick sixes, but still has had his best games. Now, those best games, though, 15, 16, 16, and 19, still has not hit 20 fantasy points a single time this year has Will Levis. So I don't love it. I don't think the ceiling is ultimately that high. The floor seems a little bit safer, 15-ish points, but I don't know that that's what we want to necessarily be shooting for. The main reason to bring up Will Levis, though, is he gets Jacksonville most points allowed, Cincinnati 3rd most points allowed, Indianapolis 12th most points allowed, and then back to Jacksonville in the fantasy championship. So should he catch lightning? We saw it last year, debuts with a 4-touchdown bombs away masterpiece in that Thursday night football game. It's not like we haven't seen Will Levis get it done before. I don't expect it, but in super flex leagues, or ultimately, if you are absolutely desperate, you could look to him. Last quarterback I wanted to toss out there as a 1-week stream, and really the rest of the season, Aiden O'Connell, just 2% rostered, chucks 340 yards and 2 touchdowns last week against the Chiefs. Now gets an even softer matchup, the Tampa Bay Bucks, 2nd most points allowed to QBs. It has been a glorious spot to stream against. I absolutely love that one for Aiden O'Connell, and follows that up in the fantasy championship, fantasy playoffs. Atlanta, the 8th most points in week 15. Week 16 gets Jacksonville, as we just talked about, the most points allowed. And then week 17, New Orleans, middle of the road matchup, 23rd in terms of points allowed, but at least 2 banger matchups in your fantasy playoffs. And then to get you in this week, Tampa Bay allowing the 2nd most points. And he has hit 270 yards in just a quarter of his games, but that shows you there is some upside. Again, 25% of the games, you wish it was closer to 50%, but when he's played 90% of snaps, you've had a 1 in 4 chance of getting a really solid game. And when you're facing the Bucks, I think those odds dramatically increase. So really, really big fan of Aiden O'Connell as a 1-week streamer. But let me know in the comments if you have any quarterback questions. I'm happy to answer those streamer questions, and really any questions, Wolfpack, whatever I can do to help you out at any position with your waiver wire, with your defense planning, whatever it might be. Please do let me know. I would love to answer those. We're going to move on to the running back position, but please do consider, if you like what you're hearing, about 200 of you with us, would love that thumbs up button. I love this show. It takes a lot to prepare, and I wanted to make sure to have a banger ready for you guys here in week 14, given the stakes, given how high it is. So if you like what you're hearing, please do consider a little bit of appreciation. It would be so greatly appreciated on my end. Thank you again, guys, for being here. And get those questions. Fill that mailbag up. I only got like 3 or 4 questions so far. Would love to answer more. Moving to the running back position, and there is one guy, and everyone's going to be talking about him on every single waiver wire show, so I can't be left out of that party. But it's absolutely true. Isaac Guerendo is that blow all your FAAB. We've waited all year. There haven't been too many, if any, opportunities quite like this for Isaac Guerendo here. I would spend every last dollar. If I had $100 left in my FAAB, I would unload the clip to get him. Whatever I have left, I'm going to chuck it at the wall and see if it sticks in any of my leagues, because I think this guy could be a true stretch run hero. We got Christian McCaffrey with the knee. He's done for the rest of the regular season, probably the rest of the year, given their poor playoff status. And then Jordan Mason also on the injured reserve. We won't see him till week 18 at the earliest. That leaves the way for Isaac Guerendo to potentially smash in fantasy. What do we love about the guy? Well, he is an absolute freak athlete to start there. 9.9 RAS score, 20th highest of all running backs all time, relative athletic score, that is, of 1,903 running backs. He is 20th, legitimately first percentile, 99th percentile, the top of the top, 99th percentile, 4.3340 at 225 pounds. 125.7 speed score is legitimately 100th percentile. There's never been higher. This guy is the definition of a size speed specimen at 6 feet, 220 pounds with that type of breakaway speed, 24 miles per hour. He's been clocked at so far. Absolute terror, absolute animal here. And then it's actually been getting it done on the field in the limited times we have seen him. There's only been 1 week where Isaac Guerendo was featured. Week 8 versus Dallas, he had 61% of the snaps. He had 14 carries, 4 targets. He had ended up racking up 102 yards, 4 from scrimmage, 1 touchdown, 19.2 fantasy points. Was the running back 10 in that week. And ultimately, he fell down purposely on the goal line because his team was up and he wanted to make sure they could bleed the clock. So that could have been an even bigger day in the box score. Averaging right now, very small sample, I get it, but 5.9 yards per carry, trails only Saquon and Derrick Henry here, and Jahmyr Gibbs. So ultimately, 3 pretty quality backs to be mentioned alongside in per carry efficiency here. And we know that Kyle Shanahan has made absolute gold in the past with far lesser athletes. And Guerendo, too. What I'm encouraged by, Jordan Mason had only 9% targets per route run. Well, Guerendo's at 14%. So maybe the ceiling is even higher. We know the speed is there, the opportunities for big plays. I don't think the down-to-down efficiency will be quite like Mason, who was a very reliable 3-yard, 5 yards, 7 yards, just always falling forward. I think it's going to be a lot more like 2, 3, and then 20, type of player here with Isaac Guerendo. But still, absolute burst, electricity in the backfield that has made monsters out of nobodies in the past. Kyle Shanahan even compared this guy to Raheem Mostert in the preseason, talking about how he envisioned him in a long-term ceiling type of role. Well, the dice are cast at this point. Let's see how Isaac Guerendo performs. But again, bid all the FAAB. Do whatever you have to go get this guy. He is the jackpot type of pickup. And we're probably not going to get anything like this again this year. We really haven't had anything up until this point that was worth truly blowing 100% of your FAAB. But here it is. I would make sure to go out and get this guy and see what happens. Should you miss on him, Patrick Taylor, he's only 0% roster. Maybe you have no FAAB at all. I'd sneak this guy in there too, though, just in case something happens to Guerendo. He's banged up throughout this year early on. And ultimately, Patrick Taylor is the more natural, just kind of big body, churning the Jordan Mason type of role we were just talking about, where you need 4 yards, he'll get you 5. Not quite the boom bust runner that Isaac Guerendo is. So maybe Patrick Taylor ends up carving himself out a meaningful role. At minimum, he's now the 49ers handcuff running back there. So I do think Patrick Taylor is worth a stash as well. This is the time of the year, though, fantasy playoffs on the verge, where as long as you're getting through, your bench doesn't necessarily matter nearly as much. You don't need those wide receiver 5s and 6s anymore. You have your starting lineup set from weeks 15, 16, and 17, maybe a couple depth pieces, but ultimately this is the time to load up on stashes and handcuffs, specifically at the running back position. Even though 2024, I've never seen a year quite like this at the health at the running back position. Nobody's been getting hurt. There's been really no value to emerge at running back right now. That doesn't mean that can't change here down the stretch. We just saw CMC go down and now Guerendo's a blow-it-all. Well, maybe we have to get ahead on some other guys here in the fantasy playoffs. So when I'm looking at stashes, when I'm looking at handcuffs here, I want to ask first, am I confident in this environment? Is this something where any type of running back can step in and thrive? Am I confident, number 2, that the running back will command the touches? Will it be forced into a committee situation? We see that so often. The starter goes down. He was a 70% workload guy, and now that 70% is divided up between 3 mouths, and it stinks. But some guys, as backups, could truly command massive workloads. And so we'll talk about the ones we truly believe in being capable of doing so. And then with the work they get, are they good talents? Are they going to actually produce? That's not always the crucial piece here, but every now and again, you can get these electric backs that come in, even if they're just kind of plotters. If they're getting the volume, that can be crucial as well. And now I do add one. That's usually the checklist I go through all year. But wow, at this time of the year, the fourth wrinkle I like to examine is how's that playoff schedule look? And not everyone's going to be rosy and perfect, but a lot of these guys have great playoff schedules, and I do want to prioritize those guys because ultimately we only have 3 games left after this week, and I want the guys that should the starter go down, like they have a matchup where I'm going to rank them in my top 15, my top 10 potentially even for some of these names. And so those are the guys I'm prioritizing. And you can see the name on the screen. It's been sitting there for a little while. Zach Charbonnet, unsurprisingly, is my number 1 running back stash. And handcuff, he's out there in 60% of leagues. I was shocked by that. I kind of just Googled his name thinking he was going to be about 70% rostered. No, he's out there in a ton of leagues right now. And we've already seen it with him. 2 starts, 15.5 and 24.2 half PPR fantasy points. Ultimately out-touched Kenny McIntosh. 40 touches to Kenny McIntosh's 3. Was the clear-cut every down featured back. Was Zach Charbonnet? And he's pretty good. He's no Ken Walker, but definitely one of the more premier talents as a number 2 running back. I think if anything does happen to Ken Walker, and ultimately Charbonnet closed out that game because Walker had a tough hit on his knee. He went down. It wasn't like he was carted off. Didn't look like it was anything totally serious, but it does seem like Charbonnet, he got those last 3 touches, including the goal line one, which he converted on, and it could be something. If Walker ends up missing any time or is hampered and limited, maybe Charbonnet takes over for these remaining 3 weeks. The schedule, not too shabby. Arizona, 15th points. Green Bay, 18th in points. Minnesota, 30th. That's a tough matchup there in week 16. But in your championship, he gets Chicago, a top 10 matchup as well. So should he make any starts in there, other than Minnesota, he'd be a lock for the lineups. And even then, given the volume that he gets in his starts, I think Charbonnet would probably still be a top 20 running back in that matchup. The next number 2 handcuff I have, the number 2 stash, is Braylon Allen, 32% rostered. And there's a couple reasons why he's as high. The environment issues are real. Aaron Rodgers looks like a complete dumpster fire. The line doesn't look nearly as good. So I don't love Braylon Allen's environment like I expected to this year. We still saw Breece Hall put up a 30-point day just 2 weeks ago, and I don't think it's completely something to rule out that Braylon Allen could have some monster days. The youngest player in the NFL right now, an absolute tank, size, speed beast here is Braylon Allen. But the reason I really have him high is this playoff schedule, plus the fact that Breece is already hampered. Looking at Breece, is coming off a season-low 52% of the running back touches last week. Did not look very efficient on any of them. And with the Jets dead and even more dead, it does seem like a very real possibility that Breece Hall just gets shut down. Maybe he even just shuts down himself. I don't know, but it seems like whether this knee ends up just flaring up even more and they have to ultimately shut him down, or they just want to play it safe, there's a very real path for Braylon Allen to get there given the starter status in front of him. Breece Hall also only had 1 of the 6 running back targets last week to show you how his role is diminishing. If I'm moving forward, I am terrified for what this guy could be doing in my fantasy lineups. But what I also love, and I hinted at, was the playoff matchup. So he gets Miami this week. Not going to really start Allen in most situations unless I'm desperate for the bye week. I have some injuries piling up. But if he continues to take over the work for Breece Hall, you got Jacksonville in week 15, second most points. Rams in week 16, ninth most points. Buffalo in week 17, third most points allowed to backs. Legitimately 3 straight top 10 matchups, 2 in the top 3. You could not ask for a better playoff schedule for Mr. Braylon Allen here. So he is my number 3 running back stash. Not far behind him is Tyler Algier, 32% rostered. He also has a solid schedule. Tough matchup versus Minnesota this week, but you're not worried about that because you're just stashing in case something happened to Bijan. But then you got the Raiders, the Giants, and the Commanders. None of those matchups are scary. The Giants are bottom 5 in points allowed, highest yards per carry allowed to running backs. And we've already seen Tyler Algier go berserk before in the fantasy playoffs. Nonetheless, either as a rookie was the running back 5, averaged 16.3 fantasy points per game from weeks 15, 16, and 17 and 18. Had 13 plus fantasy points in all 4 of those weeks. Ultimately racked up 1,000 yards in that season. So Tyler Algier, definitely somebody, 3-down capability. I would be more than happy to have on my bench. Ray Davis, got to mention him as well. Fresh off an 11 carry, 62-yard day. He just continues to flash every time he touches the rock. A beast of a bowling ball type of player. We've already seen James Cook miss one game, and it was clear Ray Davis was the number 2 back behind him, had 80% of the running back touches in that game. Absolutely thrived, racked up over 150 total yards, dominated as a receiver as well. Now, with Ray Davis, the schedule isn't quite as juicy as some of these other handcuffs. Gets the Rams this week. That's actually a good spot, but we know James Cook is there. But should James Cook miss time, well, Detroit comes up in week 15, 31st in points allowed. Then New England, not a bad spot at all, 12th in points allowed. Then the Jets, middle of the road, 23rd, but they continue to get worse and worse by the week. So at least in week 16 and 17, Ray Davis could be a real beast should he be making a start. It'd be hard to trust him even as a starter against Detroit, though, in that week 15 matchup. Next up is Blake Corum. I just have like 3 other handcuffs I want to quickly chat through, but this is the time of the year you really need to be diving into these guys and stashing them. Blake Corum coming off a career high, season high, 8 carries, 42 yards, and a 30% snap share. Not sitting here trying to victory lap. Oh my God, 30% snap share. Let's go. But ultimately, this guy looked really good. 8 carries, 42 yards, well over 5 yards a pop there. And again, that snap share continuing to eat into the work there of Kyren Williams, who had a great week, 15 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown himself. But Corum did look phenomenal, and that workload could catch up to him at any moment, Blake Corum, with Kyren Williams. So they get Buffalo this week, a great spot for running backs. But then in the fantasy playoffs, San Fran, 6th most points allowed to backs. Great matchup there. The Jets, well, we talked about middle of the road. And then Arizona, 15th in points allowed as well. So if Corum does end up making any starts, we know this McVay backfield is an absolute gold mine that he loves to ride when running back and that he really likes to feast at the red zone, his running backs. That's why Kyrie has just dominated, averaging nearly a touchdown a game since taking over as the starter. Alrighty. And then not too far from these guys is Trey Benson. I do think he's a little bit of a tier below, I would say, those 5 guys. And then Trey Benson, 23% rostered. But we know the injury history with James Conner. He's somehow miraculously this year, no one's getting hurt at running back. I'm not wishing for injury or anything of that nature, but just trying to prepare for it. And we've had James Conner miss 3+ games every year of his career. Maybe not going to happen this year, but if he misses any type of time, look at Trey Benson's schedule. New England in week 15, 12th most points. Carolina, week 16, the most points. And then the Rams there in week 17, the 9th most points allowed to the running back position. So an absolute goldmine schedule there for Trey Benson. Definitely somebody you want to be stashing on your roster. An electric 4.3, similar to Guerendo, like a 220-pound guy that runs a 4.3. Somebody I would absolutely love to be rostering, no doubt about it. And then pulling up one other guy here, one handcuff that I have to mention because of the schedule and because we've just seen him in the past be absolutely electric. And that is Tyjae Spears for the Tennessee Titans. We talked about Will Levis's schedule. Well, bad defenses are bad defenses, and these teams are not good at defending the run either. Gets Jacksonville 2nd most points allowed to backs this week. Week 15, Cincinnati right there in the middle of the pack. And then Indianapolis and Jacksonville week 16 and 17, the 7th and 2nd most points allowed to backs. So should Pollard, this big workload he's carrying, end up catching to him. Tyjae Spears, who we saw electric last year in his limited touches. He's just been completely stymied by the fact Tony Pollard's well ahead of him. He's had some nagging injuries to deal with as well, but Spears is a phenomenal receiver. They've already talked about how they view him as a true 3-down back if they ever needed to use him in that capacity. So Spears is somebody I would not have sitting out there in waiver wires. I could totally see him if he was starting against Indianapolis or Jacksonville, would probably be a top 15 running back in my rankings. So those are the big handcuffs. I guess I should mention Cam Akers as well, given he has clearly taken over for Ty Chandler there, and we continue to see him work in right around 35% of the snaps. This last week, we had Akers have 4 carries for 22 yards, a beautiful-looking 18-run scamper with a nice spin, a stiff arm, looking phenomenal there. Aaron Jones also fumbled this game, and that's where we saw Akers start to get his role picked up a little bit. And so with a history, too, of nagging soft tissue injuries for Aaron Jones, I did want to put Cam Akers on here, not because he's as talented as any of those guys we were just talking about, a lot of electric rookies on that list. But ultimately, it feels like he has a real shot to come into a start or two here down the stretch. And we've seen 12-point days, 13-point days with the Texans as a starter as well. You look at the playoff schedule, Chicago 10th most points, Seattle 13th most points, and then Green Bay 18th. So no real threatening matchups. some in the middle of the road there. Very soft schedule. The one bonus guy I want to toss out there, and it might not even be just pure handcuff, is Kendre Miller in your deeper leagues, 3% rostered right now. But Darren Rizzi, the Rizzler, did say that Kendre Miller will be returning from injured reserve this week. He said Kendre is a, quote, talented player. There's no one who can sit here and deny that. He can produce for this team. I don't have a doghouse. My doghouse is empty at the moment. I don't have a dog, is what he said. And he also said, quote, all gas, no brakes in terms of using Kendre Miller when he returns. Sounds like he didn't really need to go into the IR, but this is the whole Dennis Allen hates this guy for whatever reason. But ultimately, he is not in Rizzler's doghouse, at least. And he has a beautiful schedule. The Giants this week, a great spot to debut, the most yards per carry allowed. And then Washington, Green Bay, Raiders, all top half matchups for Kendre Miller. And let's see, his hamstring he'll hold up for a game. That's part of why I'm not going all that crazy. But at TCU, it was hard not to love this guy. So much explosiveness. Ultimately, too, with Taysom Hill now done for the year, a volume sponge, 17 touches 2 weeks ago, 10 touches last week, and about 3/4 of action. That removed, there's going to be plenty of open volume here in this offense. And I do think Kendre Miller is a prime candidate to soak a lot of that up. All right, that is my running back pickups. Wolfpack, thank you so much for enjoying it. Hopefully you liked those. And if you did, please do consider, again, that thumbs up button. It would mean the world. It's help support this to get out to more people and help the channel grow. And, of course, if you are new around here, we'd love to have you subscribe and join the Wolfpack as we make our climb towards 5K. Moving on to the wide receiver position, Adam Thielen is my number one wide receiver pickup. Number 2 overall on my pickup list. I think this guy could be set for a massive stretch run. He's only 33% rostered right now. He's fresh off a 10-target, 8-catch, 99-yard and touchdown day, 25% target share. It came against the Bucs, who are just a Sev, continue to get bled through the air. But ultimately, it was just reminiscent of what we saw all last year from Adam Thielen, where he finished 15th in targets, 9th in receptions, and 17th in PPR fantasy points. A true wide receiver too. But really what I wanted to look at is those early weeks of the season. From weeks 2 to 6, he was the number 1 PPR wide receiver more than anybody in the league. Adam Thielen was on the most berserk tear. 20 points, 31 points, 15 points, 27 points, 28 points. The guy went bananas through that 5-week span, averaging 24.7 fantasy points per game. And he's right back into that 80% slot role where he was getting those layup looks and feasting. And now Bryce Young looks even better than the quarterback that was facilitating those monster days. And what if it's just Adam Thielen? Maybe that time off with the injury helps him out. It kind of last year, older guy, ran out of gas down the stretch run, but he looks as fresh as ever. And maybe we got those legs under him like we had for the beginning of last season. There's no reason he can't go on a big stretch run here. Now, this coming week, it's a tough matchup. Philly, 28th in points allowed. 2 wide receivers in particular. Cooper DeJean, you guys have seen the guy play. Absolute stud. One of the highest graded corners in the league as a rookie. Probably one of the lead candidates for the rookie of the year from the defensive side of the ball. And he plays the slot pretty exclusively. So not a good spot to use Thielen this week. But then you got Dallas, Arizona, and then Tampa Bay again, who he just bombed. So that week 15 through 17 could be a really nice stretch run here for Adam Thielen, making him my number 1 wide receiver pickup of the week. Moving forward, though, we do have some Browns. We already talked about Jameis Winston at the top, but Cedric Tillman getting dropped like crazy right now due to the injury. And then Elijah Moore, only 11% rostered. Let's remind you of this aerial pie, how much volume here is up for grabs. Winston's averaging 336 yards per game and 43.6 attempts per game. He has 40 attempts in all but 1 game, so 4 out of 5. And that 1 game he didn't was an absolute blizzard. And just to remind you, if that game gets removed, Winston's currently averaging 47.7 attempts per game and 365.5 yards per game. That is a massive aerial pie, and so much good fantasy production is coming out of there, like Jerry Jeudy. And I understand, at this point, Jerry Jeudy probably is that number 1. But it wasn't long ago that Cedric Tillman was considered the clear-cut top dog here, and I won't rule out the fact that he could walk right into a 1A, 1B type of situation. 12, 9, 11, and 8 targets in the 4 games before he got hurt, Cedric Tillman, and looking likely that he could return as early as this week. Now, should he miss time, or even if he doesn't, There is so much to go around here, so much pie to feed the mouths. So Eli Moore will remain relevant, in my opinion, anyways, whether Tillman is back or not, but especially if he's out. 12, 9, and 8 targets in 3 games with Cedric Tillman. Also had 5 and then 14 targets this past week without Tillman in the lineup. And ultimately, Eli Moore in half PPR has racked up 12.5 points in 3 out of 5 games. And again, I like to consider it 3 out of 4 games, given that snow that 1 week. And then if you go to full PPR, I mean, we're talking 16.5, 18.6, and then 19.1 PPR points. The guy has been feasting Eli Moore. Jameis Winston, so fun to root for and doing so much to raise all the fantasy ships alongside him. So Adam Thielen, Cedric Tillman, and Eli Moore, guys that I would pick up and consider right away, plug him in, start him with very minimal hesitation. The next guy, Nick Westbrook Ikhine. We're talking about him and a couple others that's like, do you trust these guys? Let's dive into the metrics. So tricky, especially with this guy, 18% rostered right now. He has now scored a touchdown in 7 of the last 8 games with 8 total over that span, the most in the NFL. He's also got the 4th most touchdowns on the year. And this guy did not start until week 6, didn't even sniff the field till week 6. And yet he's 4th among all receivers in touchdowns. 8 touchdowns on 20 receptions. And all I hear about is why that's not sustainable. And it shouldn't be at all. I don't believe it to be sustainable. And yet since Hopkins got traded, wide receiver 8 in fantasy, an 18% target share, pretty good, 17 yards per target right now. Poor man Jamo Williams. And I want to keep saying it's not going to keep going. The streak's going to end. It's Nick Westbrook Ikhine, NWI. Like, who is this guy? It's fake. Don't buy into it. Feels sketchy. 94th in targets, 96th in catches. But again, 8 touchdowns on those 20 catches. He just scores week in and week out, and he's fresh off the most points he's gotten this year. 61 yards, 2 scores on 8 targets, the healthiest volume he's seen all year. And that's now his second top 10 games in the past 3 weeks. He's been inside your top 24 wide receivers for 3 straight weeks. And we talked about it with Will Levis, a gorgeous schedule. Jacksonville, 3rd most points to receivers. Cincy, the 11th most points to receivers. Indy, the 18th most points, but specifically giving up a lot of deep balls where Ikhine is thriving right now. And then you get Jacksonville again in your championship week. So a cake, the easiest schedule for wide receivers. I want to say it's unsustainable. I want to say I don't believe it. And yet he just continues to thrive, and he's got the right matchups to continue to eat. So I do believe in Nick Westbrook Ikhine, at least at minimum as a week 14 bye week plug-in. I would be happy to toss this guy in. I trust him more than MVS, Marquez Valde Scantling. Speaking of touchdown streaks, my goodness, 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He has scored in 3 straight games now since joining the Saints. 24, 15, and 10 half PPR fantasy points in those 3 games. And looks pretty good. And we already mentioned Taysom Hill now out. That's 17 touches 2 weeks ago, 10 touches in less than 3 quarters last week. It's going to raise the floor of everyone here and should open up more volume here for MVS. But that's the issue, is similar to Nick Westbrook Ikhine, even worse, only 11% target share right now for Marquez Valde Scantling. So if one of those two is going to end up being more of a fluke, I do think it's MVS. We've seen it time and time again with this guy where you get those glimpses. Granted, not quite the consistent glimpses we've seen these last 3 weeks. 3 straight touchdowns. Tough to deny what's happening there, but ultimately, I don't buy it. I think as soon as you put your faith in this guy, Westbrook Ikhine, he's going to get 5 to 8 looks any given week. I could see MVS suddenly, boom, 0 targets and does absolutely nothing for you. New York this week, not a bad spot. Washington week 15, not a bad spot either. Both top 15 matchups. Then Green Bay in week 16, you got the revenge narrative, but I could never trust this guy in a bottom 5 matchup. And then week 17, you got the Raiders, who are sneaky, only 22nd in terms of points allowed to wide receivers. So I don't fully buy MVS, but again, with Taysom going down, with this production, if you're desperate, we've seen the big playability here. And as long as Olave's out, might be the number 1 pass catcher in this offense behind, of course, Alvin Kamara. The last wide receiver I wanted to mention is Parker Washington for you deep leaguers, fresh off a 29% target share. He saw 12 targets, hauls in 6 of them for 103 yards and a touchdown. Also caught a 2-point conversion and barely had a 12-yard touchdown sail over his head. Yet he still had 22 full PPR fantasy points. on the day. Very, very solid effort for Parker Washington, who has now run a route on 70% of the dropbacks in the 3 games Christian Kirk has been out. He's averaged a 20.5% target share in those games. And Mac Jones actually looked okay these last couple games here, filling in for Trevor Lawrence, particularly this last game out. It's been pretty ugly until then, but I thought he looked more in command than we saw really ever as a Patriots fan since his rookie year. So yeah, tough schedule though for Parker Washington. Tennessee 26th in points allowed. Jets 32nd, although they're crumbling. Raiders 22nd, and then Tennessee again 26th. So 3 of the 4 matchups are bottom 6 in the league, and then 1 matchup bottom half. So not the best spot here for Parker Washington to go on one of those crazy stretch runs and be a hero, yet he's getting that kind of slot Christian Kirk high percentage throws here, and it seems to have that backup connection cooking there with Mac Jones as well. So wanted to at least mention him as a plausible add. Alrighty, and we will wrap up our top pickups of the week with tight end, and I only have one for you. That's Juwan Johnson. We continue to mention Taysom Hill being removed from this offense. Again, 17 touches 2 weeks ago, 10 touches last week in just 3 quarters. This is a volume sponge now completely removed, and there's going to be a lot of volume now up for grabs. And Taysom Hill being out, that means Juwan Johnson will only get more of a share. But he's coming off a season best 79% route share, 19% target share, 21% air yard share. The best we've seen all season here for Juwan Johnson. Didn't do anything crazy with the volume, ultimately racked up around 6 points in half PPR settings. But don't forget, Juwan Johnson last year was the number 1 tight end in the fantasy playoffs, averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game from weeks 15, 16, and 17, was a top 12 tight end in all 3 weeks. And this could just be another case of history repeats itself. Just don't overthink it, especially given in week 15, Washington, not a bad matchup. And then especially week 16 and 17, Green Bay gives up the 9th most points to tight ends. And then in week 17, the Raiders give up the 3rd most points to tight ends as well. So through 2 top 10 matchups in the last 2 weeks of the season for Juwan Johnson. It would not shock me at all if he is again a top 5 option at the tight end position for your fantasy playoffs. Well, that wraps up all the waiver wire pickups I have, all the offensive weapons you can add. I do know, though, it is the horizon of the playoffs. And so now I want to dive into a defensive game plan for your fantasy playoffs. Who can you stash right now to get ahead of this and ultimately prep yourself to go nuts? There's nothing. It's one of the simplest things to do, but it can be one of the most impactful. When you have that 17-point defense, the 20-pointer that goes off, you need every edge you can get when you are facing the best of the best in your fantasy playoffs. And one of the easiest ways to gain that edge is getting ahead right now on your defensive game plan. So I'm going to dive into a few different things here with you to hopefully help you craft the best option for yourself. First thing you got to ask, though, is what should we prioritize? Talent versus matchup. What is more important? And when you ask that question, especially at defense, you got to think about, okay, is this matchup worth the defense on the other side? Can they rack up sacks? Can they get turnovers? Are they the type of talent pool that can, even though they might be mediocre in the right matchup, ultimately thrive and go off? Or is it just not worth it at all? And quite conversely, what about these elite defenses? Minnesota, Denver, Pittsburgh, are they locks? Do you absolutely set and forget no matter how good they've been? If they're in a tough matchup, what do we do with a talented defense facing a really good offense? Well, look at Minnesota, and they are probably lined up the number 1 defense right now in points per game, and I think they're going to continue to cruise. They get Chicago in week 15, 10th most points. Seattle, 5th most points allowed, tons of sacks getting surrendered there, and particularly bad special teams. And then it's really tough to get Green Bay in your championship weeks. So maybe you need to find yourself a streamer for week 17. But ultimately, if you have Minnesota, you're just riding these guys to your championship and maybe coming up with a backup plan. I got one for you. We'll talk about for week 17 in a second. You got to feel great. Denver, meanwhile, you got Indianapolis, 14th. Fine. Light it up. Then you got the Chargers. Not a great matchup, 24th. I'd keep that going, though. And then Cincinnati, 21st in points allowed to defenses. Not a great matchup either, the way Joe Burrow's cooking. But by then, is Burrow still going to be the quarterback? Are they going to be resting Jamar Chase? Is T. Higgins going to be having a mysterious injury because he doesn't want to play for this team anymore? I would not rule that being a smash spot where like Jake Browning and poor weapons are playing either. So Denver, Minnesota, you're riding them. Pittsburgh, though, Philadelphia, 23rd most points. Baltimore, 32nd most points. And Kansas City, 26th most points allowed to defenses. You couldn't craft a worse 3-game slate. Again, Eagles, Ravens, and Chiefs in your fantasy playoffs. That is absolutely brutal. And of the elite defenses, and again, it went Minnesota first in points scored, Denver second in points per game, and Pittsburgh's third. I don't want to trust Pittsburgh in my fantasy defenses. That's the one of these defenses where matchups are going to outweigh the talent, and I just don't expect the Pittsburgh defense to be viable in those 3 matchups. So I would be looking elsewhere for defenses. Now, who can I look at? Well, let's look at the schedule. Who has the easiest strength of schedule among your fantasy defenses right now? The teams you want to target: Titans, most points allowed; Cleveland, second most points allowed. And Jameis, I know he's scoring points, but we saw it last night, 20 points the defense for the Broncos, even though they gave up 32 points. It's just a fun, just complete dump fest. Then you got the Giants, of course, at number 3 in points surrendered. Vegas has given up the 4th most points to fantasy defenses. Seattle's the 5th, especially because their special teams are so bad. And then the Patriots are the 6th. I would say those 6 teams, you have the Cowboys. You got some other teams that are kind of on the rise right now. But if you can match up with Titans, Browns, Giants, Raiders, Seahawks, or Patriots, you're in a great spot. The rub there, though, is in terms of the defenses that face those teams in the multiple times across the next 3 weeks, it's bad. The best matchups for defenses come to Cincinnati. They get the Tennessee Titans, first most points allowed, the Cleveland Browns, second most points, and then they get Denver in your championship. If you somehow made it there with Cincy as your defense, I'd be stunned. They've had negative points in 3 different games. They're 29th as a scoring defense. They have had a few booms. I'll give them that, but too risky in my opinion, even though they have the best schedule, the Cincinnati Bengals. Second best schedule, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are 30th in scoring defense points per game right now. They get Tennessee, they get the Jets, who have quit, the Raiders, and then Tennessee again. So Tennessee's this week, and then for the playoffs, it's Jets, Raiders, and Titans again. You couldn't ask for a better schedule. If this defense was even halfway decent, they would ultimately be below your FAAB. This team could go on a heroic run. But it's the Jags. They've been awful this year. Again, 30th in scoring defense, probably despite the good schedule, leaving them on my waiver wire, but I had to mention it. And then the third best schedule is the Atlanta Falcons, 28th in points per game as a defense, though one of the worst pass rushes we've ever seen. They get the Raiders, 4th most points allowed, the Giants, 3rd most points allowed, and then Washington, who you would never consider playing the Falcons against. But weeks 15 and 16, Raiders, Giants, seems intriguing. And of these 3, I actually wouldn't hate going to the Falcons. They just had a 5-sack game with a turnover against the Chargers, ultimately racking up 11 fantasy points. I know the upside's very low. They've been 3 or fewer in 8 of 12 games. Very rare has the Falcons ultimately come through for you. But again, the Raiders and then the Giants, that's very solid, especially the Giants at home in week 16 there. You got to give that a strong look. I do think the Falcons are a defense that you could actually consider. But none of those 3, again, the Bengals, Jacksonville Jags, or Falcons are at the top of my list. And those are the easiest schedules, but there are a few defenses that are actually okay and that you could get on your waiver wires in good spots, not great spots. And the number 1 defense that I will pick up is Green Bay, 44% rostered, which might go down even further because of that matchup with the Lions. They are the 5th highest scoring defense on the season right now in fantasy points per game. And they get Seattle, 5th most points allowed to defenses, New Orleans, 12th most points allowed to defenses, and Minnesota, the 11th most points. Sam Darnold taking a lot of sacks, turning the ball over a lot. Green Bay is a set and forget. If you can get them, there's a lot of potential patchwork. You roster 2 defenses, get to the end this way that you can do. But ultimately, if you just want a nice, safe, let's get one defense that I think I can rely on for the rest of the year, Green Bay would be my number 1 ad right now. I think they can carry you to the title and ultimately give you like an 8 to 12 point threshold each and every week. We've seen a few 20-point spikes from them this year as well. Another defense out there in a lot of leagues that's just a very good defense. In fact, they're the 4th highest scoring defense on the year in fantasy points per game right now, yet they're only 38% rostered. That's the Los Angeles Chargers. And I see the schedule. I don't love it. Tampa Bay, 22nd in points allowed, but lost a lot of weapons, giving up a lot of sacks right now. Baker certainly could turn that thing over. I'd have zero hesitation playing the Chargers in week 15. Then you get Denver in week 16. That's a tough spot, 27th in points allowed. But then if you somehow make the championship with your Chargers there, Patriots are the guys looming there, 6th most points allowed. That seems to me like a potential 20-point spot. We've seen the Chargers have 18, 19. So they've had some really big spikes and rarely have truly just crushed you. This is a genuinely good defense. Again, 4th highest scoring defense on the year, out there in nearly 70%. It's definitely a spot where I would consider that's the defense too. If you somehow have let's say you have the Vikings and you don't want to mess with that Green Bay matchup in week 17, but the Chargers are waiting for you, that's like the ultimate defensive pairing, I would say, is if you can go Chargers and get them the Vikings and just light it up. Now, Vikings aren't going to be out there in most leagues, but if you have them and you need that week 17 fill-in, I would bid whatever I could to get the Chargers, and then you are set at defense. That's the ultimate game plan, in my opinion. Green Bay being a close second because you just get 3 nice spots. You don't have to worry about the mixing and matching and taking up multiple roster spots. One other defense, though, that is cooking right now, and I know a lot of people seem to be mentioning them, and for good reason, only 16% rostered. That's the Arizona Cardinals. They are the 10th highest scoring defense in fantasy points per game, and they get the New England Patriots at home, 6th most points allowed. The Panthers, who somehow have become not a great matchup for defenses, 16th in points allowed, and then the Rams, 20th. So not the best of matchups, but we've seen this Cardinals team really picking it up. 12, 12, 11, and 7 points in their last 4 games. They've had a lot of sacks too. 6, 3, 5, and 5 sacks in those 4 games as well. And that's something that just John, again, a good defensive mind. He's really coached his team to get after the passer and use his talent quite well in those situations. Plus, you pick them up now, you get Seattle in week 14. Again, the special teams crumbling, 5th most points allowed. So not only can you use them in week 14 to help you get into the playoffs, Arizona could be a team that you then ride it on out at minimum. Pick them up for Seattle this week, Patriots in week 15, and let that carry you to your next matchups. Maybe that can carry you to the last defense I want to mention, the Indianapolis Colts. 17th ranked in points per game, so not a doormat, not great, very middle of the road. And week 15, they get the Broncos. Nothing I'd want to mess with there. But then in week 16 and 17, 2 home matchups. The Titans, I guess the Giants are on the road, but you get the Titans and Giants, both top 3 matchups for defenses. So no team for week 16 and 17 have better matchups, especially if you have that bye. If you're in the 1 or 2 seed and you just want a defense to lock in for week 16 and 17, you couldn't do much better than the Indianapolis Colts in terms of matchups. Again, Titans, Giants, 2 top 3 matchups in the semis and then the finals. It's still tough to trust a defense that's pretty mediocre, but they have a ton to play for here, the Colts. They could still make the playoffs, and so you know they're going to be going balls to the wall. They're returning more and more defensive talent as the year has gone on, and so I really, really like stashing this team. And again, you could play like the Cardinals and the Colts, and ultimately you have the week 15 with the Cardinals, week 16, 17 with the Colts type of situation. So those are some defenses, again, to pair up. You kind of heard the matchups there. I guess the simplest plan would, again, be the Packers because you just got 3 solid enough matchups for a defense that's 4th in terms of fantasy points per game here. And they're out there, again, in well over half of leagues. So that would be my number 1 choice, the simplest way. But I do love, again, if you got to rotate some things around, some ways that you could potentially do that to get to the Colts, for example. Well, the Ravens, 70% roster, but they're on bye this week. You see them getting dropped a ton, because they're only the 24th defense in fantasy points per game, but they get the Giants in week 15. So if they get dropped, I love picking up the Ravens. I also have seen the Buffalo Bills on a ton of waiver wires, especially on Sleeper. They're only 50% rostered because they were facing the 49ers. Everybody worried about that matchup. Well, you look at that playoff schedule, they get the Lions in week 15. So if they get dropped, another reason to pick them up, because in week 16, they get the Patriots, and in week 17, they get the Jets. Both of those matchups will come at home. Both of those are top 12 matchups, and especially the Jets crumbling at this time of the year. I would love to have the Bills for week 16 and 17. That's another one. If you are going to be on a bye and you do not need week 15, you should be doing everything you can to get yourself the Buffalo Bills, and even if not, pairing them with the Cardinals for that again, Patriots. Yeah, the Patriots back-to-back weeks, Patriots, or maybe again the Ravens get dropped, and they're sitting out there for you. So those, again, it's one of those weird years. Usually there's a defense that has like a solid defense that gets these beautiful matchups. Really, the only one I see that being is the Green Bay, and it's not beautiful matchups. The beautiful matchups, again, go to the Jacksonville Jags, the Bengals, and the Falcons. None of those three. All three of them, 28th, 29th, and 30th in terms of fantasy points per game. So it's not a great year for trying to play the best of the best matchups, but it's a good year if you want to pick and choose, get the Chargers for Week 17, get the Bills for Week 16, get the Cardinals for Week 15. I wouldn't roster more than 2, maximum 3 defenses, depending on how deep your benches are. But ultimately, 2 defenses, pair the Colts and the Cardinals, or pair the Chargers and the Packers. Something of that nature. Especially if you have the Vikings, you want to get a good defense for Week 17. You got a bunch of options here. As Chargers being my favorite, but again, the Colts being a great Week 17 option as well. So those hopefully give you some ideas and some moves to consider for your defensive positions. Thank you again so much, guys, for hanging out and listening to all that. My man, Virginia man, I see you. Seeing you were live, just coming in to hit that like, took your advice and kept Tyreek Hill in the receiver. Hey, let's go. I'm glad he had a good week for you, Virginia man. Thank you so much for popping in, hitting the like, and then whether you're still here or not, I'm sorry I missed your super chat early. I normally let you guys cut the line, but we don't have our moderator on the show here because on the Tuesday show, it's not usually full with super chats. So Virginia man, coming into every broadcast, supporting your boy. You're the man. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so, so much. Let's get on to all of the remaining questions. And 430 here, not a bad turnout. Would love that thumbs up button wherever you're watching from, the YouTube, the heart button on Twitter, the shares, the likes, the retweets. That stuff does go such a long way to helping us grow here. It's so good to be back for a Waiver Wire show. I've missed doing this one. And I would love your guys' support and helping to get out to more people. And, of course, hit that subscribe button if you are new around here. Hey, Wolf, Caleb or Levis this week? Also, trying to stash Richardson. I'm done with Stroud. Yeah, Stroud is just a complete bag of dirt. You can't do it against the Jags. Who are you going to do it against? Yeah, I got no interest in holding on to him. I think I got to go Caleb. I know we talked about Levis, how good that schedule is. He gets the Jags, the most points for quarterbacks. It's Will Levis. And he hasn't topped 19 points on the year. He's rarely been above 15 points. He can combust at any minute. And Caleb's really cooking. He's got, 29, 24 back-to-back games since that new coordinator took over, really simplifying the game, limiting the reads. Not the best of matchups for Caleb, but he's just been cooking at another level. Keenan Allen's gotten healthy. I think there's way more upside, Yoso Tony, to Caleb than Levis, despite the good matchup for Levis. Other than Buffalo and Arizona have any playoff defenses to stash? I think we answered that one for you, Yoso Tony. We had a nice 20-minute segment on those defenses. But if you have any specific questions based on who's out there in your league, let me know. Pick Gus Bus, Vidal, Madison. Happy PR. Thank you. Thank you? Question mark? Do you want to thank me? Do you not? I'm just best for you, 10 win. I would pick up, again, none of these guys really. Do you have to start one is the question, Tien Win. Because if you actually have to start one this week, I guess I'd go with the Bus. He saw about 60% of the work. It's a better offense there. I like Vidal more as a stash. He's got more upside, more juice. But if I had to play one of these guys this week, it'd probably be Gus Bus. But again, we went through all those running backs earlier, Tien Win, and I would rather have any of those top 6, 7. Certainly Isaac Guerendo, but definitely Charbonnet, Braylon Allen, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis, Blake Corum, Trey Benson, maybe even Kendrick Miller. If it's just a pure stash, I'd probably have any of those guys above that. Maybe Vidal is a pure stash above, Kendrick Miller, but the rest of those guys I would take over any of these 3. But if you have to start one, I'd guess I'd go Gus Bus. Michael DeGangi, what's going on? Need a quarterback with Lamar on bye, half-point completion, and 6-point half-point completion. Interesting. Carr, Winston, Levis, Geno, Caleb, Bryce, especially with the half-point completion. The volume Winston's got, 47.7 attempts per game other than that Blizzard game. I know the matchup is not great with the Steelers, but the matchup wasn't great with the Broncos, and he just threw nearly 500 yards. And when you get, especially the points per completions, when you got that type of volume, I got to go Winston there. Geno's a very close second. He's been pretty safe and steady, but the upside is certainly with Winston, and that's where I'm rolling. Especially because you get some nice playoff matchups, too. I know you got Lamar, so you're never going to play him, but minimum, you don't want to run into a Winston buzzsaw if faces like the Bengals in Week 16. It just destroys you, you know? Austin, what's going on, brother? Picked up Isaac for $2 on October 27th. He got the day written down and everything. Dear Diary, I picked up Isaac Guerendo today. It was a good day. I love it, though. I mean, that's a Wolf move. I picked him up at one point, cut him once Jordan Mason and CMC were both back. Figured there was no shot at him ever getting to a true backup, and here we are. I'd blow every single penny. I wish I still had him, Austin. Wish I was as smart as you, brother. I'll be writing in my diary my nightmares that I didn't keep him. Levi C. 2 separate leagues, both defensive questions. Start Bucks or Saints and pick one, 49ers or Bucks. I got to go with the Bucks this week against the Raiders. I do think they're about fool's gold, though. They have an okay playoff schedule. I've seen a lot of people recommending them. Their secondary is just atrocious. Now, I don't know. Aiden O'Connell, maybe he gets it done. We had 340 yards against the Chiefs. He probably could get it done against this defense, too. But I could see a pick 6 plus him then, kind of what the Jameis Winston effect was. So I am leaning Bucks there. I don't love it, but I don't really like the Saints or the 49ers defense, which seems to be a doormat at this point. So I'll go with the Bucks in both of those, Levi, but I don't love it. If I'm able to pick Guerendo, would you start him over Ken Walker or Breece Hall? I think Breece Hall, Levi, very sketched out again. 52% of the running back touches, only one of the 6 running back targets. That's scaring me. That's sketching me out. Doesn't look fully healthy either. But we'll also see, is Ken Walker fully healthy? We saw Charbonnet come in at the end there. He banged up the knee a little bit. So, yeah, I'd be worried about both these guys, but I'm more worried about Breece Hall right now. 4 bench spots for Levi. Has Bo Nix and Evan Ingram on the bench. Burrow and McBride starters. Would you drop one of them for Charbonnet? Those are fun leagues where it's shallow benches like that, where you guys got, that's where Charbonnet has so many times, not in my league, dude. I never see Charbonnet out there. I'm the toughest man on earth. But there's plenty of leagues with shallow benches, and a guy like Charbonnet's out there. I would probably drop that. It's a tricky one, right? Because any of Ingram or Bo Nix could really help another team. So that really does come down to if you cut one of these guys, what do the other playoff rosters look like, Levi? Is somebody going to be able to pick up Ingram and just start him against you? Is it full PPR where he really could go off? You're never going to start Bo Nix over Burrow unless Burrow rests, though, so it's nice to have Bo Nix in the back holster. I'd probably cut Ingram if you're confident that he couldn't come back to haunt you. I feel like Bo Nix has more haunt you potential there. But it would be nice to own Charbonnet, especially with Ken Walker a little banged up right now. So, yeah, I would try to get it done, Levi. Andres, what's up, brother? Thoughts on Calcaterra? I currently have Kraft and Ferguson. So, yeah, is there any word yet on Goddard's injury? I know he got a little banged up, but I haven't seen anything quite yet on him. He was okay in his spot starts earlier this year, but nothing he didn't light the world on fire at any point. If Devonta Smith misses time, it becomes a little more intriguing, but I'd probably just keep riding Kraft right now. Andres. Giuseppe Caruso. What's going on, brother? How about Chuba and Brooks? Should I drop Brooks for Ray Davis? I probably would at this point. I mean, Brooks would be a beast if Chuba went down, so he kind of is who's the better handcuff? So it's really tough to know. We know Ray Davis would be completely featured, but I do imagine Brooks would be completely featured if something happened to Chuba too. So gun to my head, I'd probably rather have Ray, but ultimately it might just be worth protecting your asset with Chuba there and always having a locked-in backfield. If Ray Davis, let's say James Cook goes down, Chuba stays healthy. Is Ray Davis entering your lineup at any point, or is Chuba your third running back right now, Giuseppe? Because if Chuba's your third and you just kind of want to lock up a backfield spot, it's also smart to do that this time of year. Whereas plucking other handcuffs makes sense if it would make a true starter for you. But right now, it might be better to protect your assets. So that kind of really depends on your team make and model. But I do prefer Ray Davis in general to Jonathan Brooks. Have Lamar pick up Winston, Levis, or Kirk. Not Kirk. I'm going to go Winston for that one, Giuseppe Russo. It's Westbrook worth a grab. You heard us, Manny. If you were there right around 7:30 is probably when we were talking about him. It's Ben Boomer bust, eight touchdowns and 20 catches, but 8 touchdowns since week 6, the most in the league over that span. just keeps happening. The schedule looks good. Yeah, I think he's worth the grab. I'd rather have Thielen. I'd rather have, any of the Browns receivers. But if they're gone, yeah, Westbrook's absolutely worth the grab. Moreno, what's going on? Matt Stafford, Russ Wilson, or Jameis Winston need a quarterback for Jaden on bye. I lean – at first I was going to say Russ. I really like Jameis these days. I know the matchup's tough, but, man, the matchup was tough last week, and he cooked. Need a quarterback. And then so defense, who do you take for this week and the bye? And for fantasy playoffs, rather. So for this week and moving forward, I do think the Cardinals are probably the best. They get a good matchup versus the Seahawks this week and then the Pats the next week. But I'd love to pair you got to keep the Broncos. I don't know if you do need to keep the second defense after that, though. So you really just need a week 14. I think you ride the Broncos the rest of the year. I think I like the Cardinals the most of this list. I forget the Chargers are facing I don't like the Seahawks defense against the Cardinals, but Chargers week 14. It's not the Chiefs this week. Who? It is the Chiefs this week. So yeah, I don't love the Chargers this week either. So I'd probably go Cardinals as the best option of these defenses. And glad to hear you're two playing the number one seed. Hopefully you take them down and give them a number one prize, Robert. But glad that I've helped you, brother. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for sharing the kind words. And hopefully those that help continues here. And let's get that title, baby. All righty. Ridley or Neighbors for the flex this week? Ask Kavaka 49er. Probably going to keep riding Neighbors. I know it's been ugly and tricky. I can't bring myself to bench him. Ridley does get the Jags this week, though. I mean, does it get much better? It doesn't. Yeah, Ridley's been performing, and the matchups there. I'll go Ridley this week, begrudgingly. Trade Neighbors and Hawk. Bowers my starter for Nico's. Oof! Great deal, Casey White. Well done. Especially if you had that Bowers as your tight end, but even if not, beautiful deal. Also, what defense do you like going for, Broncos or Bills? Broncos are tough to turn down because they're just, again, the second highest scoring defense. I would say, you look at the playoffs and the Bills in week 16 and 17. If you have that bye, Bills are probably going to be the better defense. They're the fifth highest scoring defense on the year in points per game. But I got to keep riding the Broncos with how good they've been all year. I wouldn't want to – their matchups are fine moving forward. And then if Burrow's getting rested by the end, I gotta kind of ride the Broncos if they've gotten me here so far, Casey. Start Ferguson or Disley this week? I got to go Disley. Is Ferguson even playing, Giuseppe? Doesn't even matter if he does. Although if he does play, he'd be getting the Bengals. So that's one to keep tracking, Giuseppe. I will definitely keep monitoring that. I'm not sure if he's guaranteed to play or not. Have Tampa D, not a fan of them for week 15 versus the Chargers, but then they have Dallas and Carolina. Would you rather play Atlanta? Tampa D, I do think is fool's gold. I don't think Atlanta's any better. So like Giuseppe, there's a bunch of others we gave there that if any of them there, the Packers, the Chargers plus the Cardinals, the Colts even. I don't want to play Tampa. I don't trust that defense at all, despite okay matchups. Carolina and Dallas are actually they're trending the wrong way for matchups. Cooper Rush is looking better. Bryce Young looks reborn. So I'd probably rather have Atlanta. But week 17, they ultimately get the Commanders. But yeah, I'd probably have Atlanta ahead of them for these next couple weeks. But I would still look to some of those other ones we've talked about, Giuseppe. Dobbins got dropped. Worth an ad for the ship. He's going to ultimately be on IR, and he might not come back this week, rather this year. So I don't think so. I cut him where I have him, and I'm not – if he comes back for the championship, it's not going to be a full workload. They're going to ease him in. So, no, I don't think there's any world where Dobbins does come back and I ultimately play him. I saw the timing, Yoso Tony, so you don't have to apologize. I got it. I chuckled when I saw your question as I was going live. I was like, I'm going to be going 20 minutes into defenses, and Yoso Tony is going to chuckle at it. So, no, don't apologize at all, man. Excellent show. Well, hey, thank you so much, Jeff, for being here, for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it, man. What's good, Bulldog? Good to see you, too. Love or Goff this week, or hit the wire for Jameis, Cousins, or Wilson, asked Jeff. I kind of like Love. I lean in Love against the Detroit secondary. That's not great. They're pretty good defense, but banged up pass rush right now. I kind of I just feel like Love's going to go off on Thursday night, Jeff. That's kind of how I'm feeling. What's up, Coach Zeke? What's Gucci? Love the defensive strategy. I have Green Bay, LAC, Arizona, and Buff all in where. I have Tampa Bay. What combo for playoff would you go? Oh, man, you got a bunch of good options here, Coach Zeke. So it comes down to, like, how many roster spots do you have? How many are you willing to use? Like I was saying, like, Green Bay is the simplest. 3 pretty good matchups for a very solid defense. You only have to use 1 roster spot. I got to dig that. But if I'm just pairing up, like, best possible matchups, like Arizona week 15 versus the Pats, beautiful. Buffalo week 16 versus the Pats, beautiful. Chargers week 17 versus, yes, the Pats, beautiful. So, I mean, like, if you somehow had the ability to just, like, face the Patriots all 3 weeks, yeah, I mean, that would somehow be the best, but that's a lot of roster spots. That's a lot of moving parts. Whereas, like, Green Bay, just kind of good matchups all the way through. That might be the simplest way to play it, Coach Zeke. But again, if your roster does allow, like, I can just stream whoever's facing the Patriots for the next 3 weeks in the playoffs, then do it. Because the Patriots, as a Patriots fan, Drake May's fun. He's exciting. They turn the ball over all the time. So it's a tough question there, Coach Zeke. I would say I don't mean it to be a non-answer. I do prefer any of these defenses over Tampa Bay. I know they got, again, a nice matchup in week 14, but if you're already locked up, especially if you're – and the other question would be too, Coach Zeke, like, do you have the bye? Do you even need week 15? Because if you don't need week 15, Buffalo Chargers, boom, you're golden. Maybe even just Buffalo because you got the Pats and then the Jets at home. Beautiful. Like, I know there's a lot of ways to play it and ways to game it, but if I can just have one defense, I'm cool with it. Like, I don't need to have all these defenses. It does also block your opponents from using them against you too, and yada, yada. So there's so much that goes into that question, Coach Zeke. But again, Green Bay's the simplest. I got a good defense for 3 good matchups. Okay. But if you have the roster flexibility, if you have the bye in week 15, you don't need the week 15 matchup. That type of stuff does factor in too. But I certainly don't hate getting the defense that's playing the Patriots all 3 weeks. Lamar has Steelers in week 16 and Winston has Bengals. So I could take Lamar. Michael, that would be a humongous dice roll to bench Lamar. I feel like he's always done okay against the Steelers too. Maybe that's just, I don't know that, like, research wise. I mean, you could. I don't think I would, Michael. I wouldn't hate having Winston on the roster just to not have to face him. But man, like, he throws 2 picks in the first quarter and gets benched, and then Lamar has his usual 30 points. You'd be never forgiving yourself, and like you lose your fantasy locker room if you got an MVP like Lamar and you take him out. So I can't, in good faith, recommend you do that, man. But hey, you can't get the biscuit without risking it. So hey, I like it. Simp, what's up? Got to take Kincaid and Tillman off IR. Should I drop Braylon and Vidal? Have Saquon, Tracy, JT, Noah, Gray, and Hunter Henry are my tight ends. I wouldn't carry 3 tight ends. I'll tell you that. I'd cut Kincaid, maybe Gray. You don't need 3 tight ends. So I would definitely keep rostering Braylon. And then, yeah, you can cut Vidal from there. But I would definitely pick whichever tight end you like the least, Simp, and cut them. For me, it'd probably be Kincaid. Like, he's been useless. I don't know. Would you drop Cedric Tillman for Thielen? Ooh, good question, Bulldog. I'd probably rather have Thielen at this point. I'd love to keep holding both of those guys, though, but I'd prefer Thielen, I think. What would it take for Miami to get into the playoffs? What would have to happen? Asks Brother Jay. I think after the loss to the Packers, it's very, very unlikely. I think they have to win out, and they have to outscore. I don't know it exactly, Brother Jay. I wish I could help you out here. I'm sure you give a good Google search of your playoff scenario for Miami. I'm pretty sure they're down to like a 3% chance. The last I checked, though, it would take a lot for Miami to get in, Brother Jay. All righty. Michael DeGangi, defense, Bucks or Saints? I would say Bucks probably this week. Who do the Saints have? I think, is it the Panthers this week? No, it's not the Panthers. I have my defensive rankings and all my rankings at rotostreetjournal.com, everybody out there. Saints get the Giants. Yeah, I prefer the Saints in that case, Michael. I forgot that. Chuba's my third running back. Have Kyron and Monty too. Still hold on. I would just hold on to Brooks then. Just lock up your backfield there, Giuseppe. Struggling at receiver. My only guys on waiver are Eli Moore, Ray. Either worth the pick. I think Eli Moore is. And we're at the point, Zeke, where FAAB just doesn't really matter anymore. So, like, if you really are struggling, I think Eli Moore is worth a solid chunk, if not all. It depends on how much you have left, but you know, we're there. The Pats, yeah, play the Pats, baby, Coach Zeke. Just play them. As a Pats fan, it would be fine. Gino or Russ this week? I would go Gino, I think, Giuseppe. Very close. Great. I don't really need week. So if you're third in clinch, you probably do need week 15, though, right, Coach Zeke? Like, you would only need if you have 1 and 2, if you have the bye week, then you would not need week 15. But you probably do need week 15 if you're in third. But if you could get the bye week, then it changes everything. But yeah, cheers. I hope the advice helped. I know we were kind of running around there for sure. Would you blow your FAAB on Guerendo? Yes, I would just blow my FAAB, whether to block other people or, you know, if he just ends up blowing up Jeff. Yeah, I would definitely. I just blow the FAAB either way. Like, who else are you going to spend it on this year, you know? I have Downs and Dobbs chilling on my bench. Yeah, that's both a down bad. No pun is intended there. I mean, Downs isn't too bad, but with Richardson back at quarterback, it's tougher to trust. So it's not horrible, but not great. I also have 3 tight ends, Henry, Ferguson, and Disley. I would drop Disley, Giuseppe. Maybe Ferg. You could drop any of them. You don't need 3 tight ends. You could drop just keep 1 at this point, right? For an MRI, Eagles and Dallas Garcia will likely sign him a week-to-week basis. Ooh. That's tough. Candidate for the short-term IR. Thank you, Andres, for the update. I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, kind of might be an okay streamer, but you probably got better out there. And as Giuseppe reminds you, good folks, with 500 of you here as we wrap up, a like, share, and sub is so greatly appreciated. The heart button or the thumbs up on Twitter versus YouTube, a share out to get us out to more people. Be so greatly appreciated. And of course, if you're new around here, we'd love to have you subscribe as we climb towards 5K. Thank you so much for tuning in. All of our content can be found at rotostreetjournal.com. My rankings, all our phenomenal writers and their breakdowns. It's all there at rotostreetjournal.com. Would love you guys to check out and support the site. Thank you again. Best of luck in the playoffs. I'll be live again Thursday. I usually go live right ahead of kickoff. It's my brother's birthday. My mom planned out a party for him. So I am likely going to have to go live at like 3:30 or 4. I'll tweet it out. I'll make sure it's on the Instagram and socials as well, what time I'm officially going live. But if you usually catch our Thursday show, it is going to be a bit earlier because ahead of kickoff, I will have a birthday party for my younger brother that my mom planned out. So I will not be live, unfortunately, at the usual time, but I will make sure to get live for at least a couple hours on Thursday afternoon, 3:30-ish is what I'm thinking. But I'll make sure to confirm on Twitter, socials, everywhere. So thanks again. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody else who tuned in. Thank you again, Virginia Man, for your consistent super chatting and your support of your boy. I greatly appreciate all of you. And a wolf of the sheep, guys. Be the wolf. Later.